talked about a fair number of books on this channel up to now, but one thing I have not talked much about is poetry. Uh, that's probably because I don't typically read that much poetry. And nothing against the form, nothing against that type of writing. But usually when I read, I like to have something long enough to really be worth my time investing in it, something that I can really, get lost in. And B, I kind of like to have a narrative, if you will, a story in which to kind of invest myself in, a story to kind of follow along with. I just prefer narrative writing to poetry, I suppose. But that is not to say that I don't read any poetry. I have done a review on Paradise Lost. That is an epic poem. I've also done a review on Hamlet by Shakespeare. A lot of that would be categorized as poetry because it's written in verse. But I've not really talked that much about poetry in what we typically think of when we talk about poetry. Um, Partly, once again, it's because I don't read that much of it, but it's also because I kind of lack the education necessary, I feel, to fully appreciate poetry. I do know a little bit about meter. I mean, I know what iambic pentameter is. I know about, blank verse and the different styles. I mean, the different meters and such a little bit. I know about rhyme scheme like A, B, B, A, all that. I know what a stanza is. I know what a verse is or whatever. But still, I think it probably requires a little bit more education than what I have to fully appreciate what goes into poetry. Um, so I haven't really talked that much about poetry on this channel, with the exception of like epic poetry, because I've talked about like the Aeneid, and I did a video on um, Paradise Lost. But I haven't talked a lot about just regular run of the mill poetry. But I would like to remedy that here today by talking about my 5 favorite poems of all time. Because though, while I may not read that much poetry, I do still have 5 poems that I consider my favorite. Um, I will also read these poems, buckle up, because that's going to be a wild ride. Because most of these poems that I consider my favorite are well within the public domain by this point, because a lot of them are pretty old. So I can claim them just as much as anybody. And the ones that aren't in the public domain, well, I'm not claiming them at all. I'm just reading them. So, um, yeah, let's get started with my top 5 favorite poems, which I will also read. Buckle up. This is gonna be fun, kids. So let's start with number 5. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Okay, let me stop you right now, because you're gonna say this is the most cliched thing ever to choose The Road Not Taken as your favorite poem, or one of your favorite poems. Because The Road Not Taken is arguably the most famous poem ever written. You see it everywhere. You can see it on car commercials. You can see it referenced everywhere, and it is also one of the most often misquoted or mistitled poems, because a lot of people call it The Road Less Traveled, and that is not the actual title. The actual title is The Road Not Taken. Um, it is, in addition to being often mistitled, it is one of the most um, misconstrued and misinterpreted poems, I think, as well, because I don't think the actual interpretation of what Robert Frost was actually saying with this poem was necessarily as apparent as a lot of people think it was. Um, but I'll explain. So let's get into it with The Road Not Taken. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Okay, once again, I think this was a very misinterpreted poem sometimes because a lot of people think that it is um, kind of extolling the virtues of choosing the road that other people don't take, when actually I think, as some other people have thought as well, it's actually kind of poking fun at that mentality, thinking that you're somehow superior because you chose the path that no other that not many other people choose. You chose the road not taken that other people don't take. But it says, if you pay really close attention, it says though really though really as for that the passing there had really warned them about the same. I think that he's kind of saying, you can think that you're being Mr. Rebel, Mr. Renegade, taking the road not taken, but really you're not quite as special as you think you are. I could be 100% wrong with that interpretation because, again, I'm probably not qualified to really give interpretations of poems such as this, but I do think that it is an often misinterpreted or at least misconstrued poem, and I think that the true gist of what Robert Frost was trying to say with that poem is a little bit more nuanced and maybe a little bit more tongue in cheek than most people think. But regardless of that, it is a remarkably beautiful poem. It is remarkably perfect, actually. I mean, this is a pretty perfect poem. It never deviates from its rhyme scheme, but it's never forced, it's never contrived. He never has to resort to any kind of abbreviations um, or kind of contractions or anything to make it work. It is very perfect. It is very concise and succinct, and yet it is very pleasing to read. So yeah, it may be cliche, but "The Road Not Taken" is my fifth favorite poem of all time. My fourth favorite poem of all time is Gunga Din by Rudyard Kipling. I have not read a lot of Rudyard Kipling. I think we had to read some of his stuff back in middle school, way back when. I think we had to read Riki Tiki Tavi. I think Rudyard Kipling wrote Riki Tiki Tavi. So I've read that. I never even did read the Jungle Book, or the Jungle Books, I should say. Very popular children's books, and I'm not even, I haven't even read that much of what Rudyard Kipling has to offer, but I have read Gunga Din, and it is, and once again, much like The Road Not Taken, it is a poem that is remarkably perfect, and it is a stunning achievement in linguistic acrobatics that he makes this poem be as perfect as it is, because once again it never deviates from its rhyme scheme, but it's never contrived and it's never forced. Everything flows very well. um, it has a very strict template which it follows um, with each verse. But it is a testament to Rudyard Kipling, and I know that Rudyard Kipling is he kind of elicits mixed emotions with a lot of people due to the fact that some of his stuff, like the white man's burden, was kind of not kind of, it was just all out racist. This is actually not a racist poem. Um, or it seems that way at the beginning, but the ultimate message of the poem is actually quite anti-racist, or at least I think it is. The main character and the narrator of the poem is definitely racist, but the ultimate message of the poem is actually pretty warm and human. Actually, it is a very sweet poem, and it kind of gets me a little bit emotional when I read it sometimes, because uh, it gives you such a complete journey, a complete psychological journey throughout the mind of this character over time as he comes to his view of this character Gunga Din, which they all just treat like complete crap. His view changes until by the end, well, that last line, which I'm about to read, is one for the ages, and it really is just a really warm and human poem. And it blows my mind that the same guy who wrote this could also write that poem, The White Man's Burden. He must have been in two separate places in his life whenever he wrote those poems, because this is a very warm and human and very moving poem. Honestly, to me, it's always moved me whenever I've read it, as I'm about to. And please, if I have any viewers from England or any British, viewers out there, forgive me for what I'm about to do, because you have to read this in that uh, working class kind of English slang, English um, that English patois, I suppose, because the way it's written, it kind of forces you to read it like that. So I cry your pardon now if I butcher this accent, which I'm going to be forced to adopt to read this. But just a little background on this: the poem Gunga Din takes place during the British occupation of India. Britain had a long history of colonialization in India, um, and this poem is a commentary upon that, as and some of the ways that the British soldiers viewed um, the native Indians, which they were working side by side with, and which they treated like complete crap as well. So let's get into it. You may talk of gin and beer, but when you're quartered safe out here and you're sent to penny fights and Aldershot it, but when it comes to slaughter, you will do your work on water, and you'll lick the bloomin' boots of him that's got it. Now in India's sunny clime, where I used to spend my time, a servant of Her Majesty the Queen, of all them black-faced crew, the finest man I knew was our regimental beastie, Gunga Din. He was Dean, 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 you limpin' lump of brick dust, Gunga Din. Hi, slippy you're the row, water get it, panty low, you squidgy-nosed old idol, Gunga Din. The uniform he wore was nothing much before, and rather less than orf that behind. For a piece of twisty rag and a goatskin water bag was all the field equipment he could find. When the sweatin' troop train lay in a sidin' through the day, when the eat would make your bloomin' eyebrows crawl, we shouted "Airy by" till our throats were bricky dry, then we whopped him 'cause he couldn't serve us all. It was Dean, 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 you heathen, where the mischief have you been? You put some Childe in it, or I'll marrow you this minute if you don't fill up my helmet, Gunga Din. He would not he would dock and carry one till the longest day was done, and he didn't seem to know the use of fear. If we charged or broke or cut, you could bet your bloomin' nut he'd be waiting 50 paces right flank rear. With his mussick on his back, he would skip with our attack and watch us till the bugles made retire. And for all his dirty hide, he was white, clear white inside when he went to tend the wounded under fire. It was Dean, 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 with the bullets kicking dust spots on the green. When the cartridges ran out, you could hear the front rank shout, "Aye, ammunition, mules, and Gunga Din." I shan't forget the night when I dropped behind the fight with a bullet where my belt plate should have been. I was choking mad with thirst, and the man that spied me first was our good old grinning, grunting Gunga Din. He lifted up my head, and he plugged me where I bled, and he guv me 'arf a pint of water green. It was crawling and it stunk, but of all the drinks I've drunk, I'm gratefulest to one from Gunga Din. It was Dean, Dean, Dean. Here's a beggar with a bullet through his spleen. He's a chawing up the ground, and he's kicking all around. For God's sake, get the water, Gunga Din. He carried me away to where a dooley lay, and a bullet come and drilled the beggar clean. He put me safe inside, and just before he died, "I hope you like your drink," says Gunga Din. So I'll meet him later on at the place where he is gone, where it's always double drill and no canteen. He'll be squatting on the coals, giving drink to poor damned souls, and I'll get a swig in hell from Gunga Dean. Yes, Dean, 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 you Lazarusian leather Gunga Dean, though I belted you and flayed you, by the living God that made you, you're a better man than I am, Gunga Dean. Once again, please forgive me for that accent that I had to adopt to read that authentically, I should say. But yeah, Gunga Dean, I mean, for my money, for what it's worth, I think this is probably the best poem that Rudyard Kipling ever wrote because it is so perfect. Like it really is. It never feels forced or clunky. There's no rape rhymes in it. He never has to make it rhyme or make it flow. It just does it on its own, and it's so completely natural. It it carries its rhyme scheme perfectly throughout the thing without having to resort to any tricks or anything shady to make it pull it off. But it really is just a perfect poem, and it's remarkably moving to me. I don't know about to you, but to me, it's such a moving thing because in just a few verses, he gives you this complete psychological evolution in this nameless narrator's mind of the way that he views the character Gunga Dean, whereas initially they just treat him like crap. Actually, they treat him like crap all the way up until the end. But he acknowledges with that last line, "You're a better man than I am, Gunga Dean," um, that the black-faced heathen Gunga Dean is actually worth more than he is, the white Christian English colonialist, because he's has a much greater degree of bravery and integrity and fidelity than the narrator does, and it really is just such a kind. It's just kind of this. It's kind of sad, honestly. It kind of puts me in a mood of sadness, but it is very beautiful, and it is kind of just sweet and kind of human, and I just really love it, and that's why it's my number 4 poem of all time. Number 3 is Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came by Robert Browning. Okay, this is the poem upon which the entire Dark Tower series of books by Stephen King is based. That is not why I love this poem so much. I love this poem independently of the Dark Tower. I can't remember when I was first exposed to this poem. Um, there's a possibility it was actually in like a textbook in high school. I can't remember. But Stephen, I actually referenced this poem quite heavily. I used it as a motif in my own book, Apocrypha, when I wrote it. And yes, Stephen King's books are the most famous things that have been written based on this, but they are by no means the only ones. Stephen King does not have a trademark on this poem. He does not have a copyright on this poem. He does not own this poem. There are numerous other authors, like by the dozens, that have written books inspired by or based upon Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came by Robert Browning. Harper Lee referenced the poem in Go Set a Watchman that came out several years ago. It's Childe Roland is referenced in that book. There are complete other novels out there that are based upon this, or at least inspired by this. Yes, Stephen King's Dark Tower books are the most famous things that have been written based and inspired by this. But Stephen King does not own this poem, and I love this poem independently of those books because I don't really love those books. I love some of the books, but then some of the books are kind of bad. So, um, yeah, this is a great poem. And the reason this is my third favorite poem, and this is a lengthy one. Like, bear with me reading this because this is a miniature epic, I suppose. This is a long one. But the reason this is my third favorite poem of all time is because it is so incredibly mysterious and it paints such a cool picture, such a creepy picture, kind of It tells such a neat story, and it like this is a poem that is not just it does not just succeed as a poem to me. It also succeeds as a short story. I think this thing could be written as a short story, and it would still be awesome because it leaves so much unsaid. You don't even know what in the world is half of what is said in this poem is referring to, but it creates this incredibly singular atmosphere of dread and regret and loss, and it's all like maybe this takes place at like the end of the world or something. It appears to take place in some kind of apocalyptic wasteland, which is largely, I think, the imagery that Stephen King was lifting when he wrote his Dark Tower books. It is a story. It is a story. It is a narrative poem which tells the story of a knight named Childe Roland. If you don't know what a child is, that is not a typo with that E. A child in medieval England and medieval France, I believe, a child, the word child with an E was used to denote a knight who was not yet officially knighted. It is a knight in training who has yet to receive their official knighthood. Um, this is the story of a would-be knight named Roland, who is the last of the band. We have no clue what the band even is, who the band even were, who comprised the band, but he is the last of the band, and he is searching for the Dark Tower. We have not a clue what the Dark Tower even is, or what's inside the Dark Tower, or why he's trying to get there, but he is traveling across this nebulous, shifting, apocalyptic, dreamlike wasteland. Um, it is so cool. It is so singular in its effect that I wish I had written this. I know I'm not even a poet. Oh my goodness, no, I'm not a poet. But if there is one poem, if there is one poem that I wish that I had written, it would be this, Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came. Largely just because I could get an assload of royalties out of Stephen King and a lot of other writers probably if I had written this, but this poem is awesome. The title, Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came, is actually lifted from the play by Shakespeare, King Lear. The fool in that play makes a quip when he's just talking nonsense and references a something where he says Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came. So this title, this poem has such a strange legacy stretching both behind it all the way back to Shakespeare and after it all the way to the current day with Stephen King and plenty of other writers out there, including myself, writing stories inspired by it. So yeah, this one's pretty lengthy, but bear with me because this is such a cool poem that I just had to read it on here. So let's go. My first thought was, he lied in every word, that hoary cripple with malicious eye, askance to watch the working of his lie, on mind and mouth scarce able to afford suppression of the glee that pursed and scored its edge at one more victim gained thereby. What else should he be set for with his staff? What save to waylay with his lies and snare all travellers who might find him posted there and ask the road? I guessed what skull-like laugh would break, what crutch 'gin write my epitaph for pastime in the dusty thoroughfare. If at his counsel I should turn aside into that ominous tract which, all agree, hides the dark tower yet acquiescingly, I did turn as he pointed, neither pride nor hope rekindling at the end descried, so much as gladness that some end might be. For what with my whole world-wide wandering, what with my search drawn out through years, my hope dwindled into a ghost not fit to cope with that obstreperous joy success would bring. I hardly tried now to rebuke the spring my heart made, finding failure in its scope. As when a sick man very near to death seems dead indeed and feels begin and end, that tears and takes the farewell of each friend, and hears one bid the other go draw breath freely or outside, since all is over, he saith, and the blow fallen no grieving can amend. While some discuss if near the other graves be room enough for this, and when a day suits best for carrying the corpse away, with care about the banners, scars, and staves, and still the man hears all, and only craves he may not shame such tender love and stay. Thus I had so long suffered in this quest, heard failure prophesied so oft, been writ so many times among the band, to wit, the knights who to the dark tower search addressed their steps that just to fail as they seemed best, and all the doubt was now, should I be fit? So quiet as despair, I turned from him, that hateful cripple, out of his highway into the path he pointed all the day. Had been a dreary one at best, and dim, was settling to its close, yet shot one grim red leer to see the plain catch its estray. For mark, no sooner was I fairly found, pledged to the plain after a pace or two, than, pausing to throw backward a last view over the safe road, 'twas gone, grey plain all round, nothing but plain to the horizon's bound. I might go on, naught else remained to do. So on I went. I think I never saw such starved, ignoble nature. Nothing throve for flowers as well expect a cedar grove, but cockle spurge according to their law might propagate their kind with none to awe. You'd think a burr had been a treasure trove. No, penury, inertness, and grimace in some strange sort were the land's portion. See, or shut your eyes, said nature peevishly. It nothing skills, I cannot help my case. 'Tis the last judgment's fire must cure this place, calcine its clods, and set my prisoners free. If there pushed any ragged thistle stalk above its mates, the head was chopped. The bents were jealous else what made those holes and rents, and the dock's harsh swarth leaves bruised as to balk all hope of greenness. 'Tis a brute must walk, pashing their life out with a brute's intents. As for the grass, it grew as scant as hair. In leprosy, thin dry blades pricked the mud, which underneath looked kneaded up with blood. One stiff blind horse, his every bone a stare, stood stupefied, however he came there, thrust out past service from the devil's stud. Alive, he might be dead for aught I know, with that red gaunt and collapsed neck astrain, and shut eyes underneath the rusty mane. Seldom went such grotesqueness with such woe. I never saw a brute I hated so. He must be wicked to deserve such pain. I shut my eyes and turned them on my heart, as a man calls for wine before he fights. I asked one draught of earlier, happier sights, ere fitly I could hope to play my part. Think first, fight afterwards, the soldier's art. One taste of the old times sets all to rights. Not it. I fancied Cuthbert's reddening face beneath its garniture of curly gold. Dear fellow, till I almost felt him fold an arm in mine to fix me to the place. That way he used, alas, one night's disgrace. Out went my heart's new fire and left it cold. Giles, then, the soul of honor, there he stands, frank as 10 years ago when knighted first. What honest man should dare? He said he durst. Good, but the scene shifts. Faugh! What hangman hands pinned to his breast a parchment, his own bands read it. Poor traitor, spit upon and cursed. Better this present than a past like that. Back therefore to my darkening path again. No sounds, no sight as far as eye could strain. Will the night send a howler or a bat? I asked when something on the dismal flat came to arrest my thoughts and change their train. A sudden little river crossed my path, as unexpected as a serpent comes. No sluggish tide congenial to the glooms. This, as it frothed by, might have been a bath for the fiend's glowing hoof, to see the wrath of its black eddy bespate with flakes and spumes. So petty, yet so spiteful, all along, low scrubby alders kneeled down over it, drenched willows flung them headlong in a fit of rout despair, a suicidal throng. The river which had done them all the wrong, whatever that was, rolled by, deterred no whit. Which, while I forded, good saints, how I feared to set my foot upon a dead man's cheek, each step, or feel the spear I thrust to seek. For hollows tangled in his hair or beard, it may have been a water rat I speared, but ugh, it sounds like a baby's shriek. Glad was I when I reached the other bank, and now for a better country, vain presage. Who were the strugglers? What war did they wage? Whose savage trample thus could pad the dank soil to a plash? Toads in a poisoned tank, or wildcats in a red hot iron cage. The fight must so have seemed in that fell cirque. What penned them there with all the plain to choose? No hoof, no footprint leading to that horrid mews, none out of it, mad brewage set to work, their brains no doubt like galley slaves the Turk pits for his pastime Christians against Jews. And more than that, a furlong on, why there, what bad use was that engine for, that wheel, or brake, not wheel, that harrow fit to reel? Men's bodies out like silk, with all the air of Tophet's tool, on earth left unaware or brought to sharpen its rusty teeth of steel. Then came a bit of stubbed ground, once a wood, next a marsh it would seem, and now mere earth, desperate and done with, so a fool finds mirth, makes a thing and then mars it till his mood changes and off he goes within a rude bog, clay and rubble, sand and stark black dearth. Now blotches rankling, colored gay and grim, now patches where some leanness of the soils broke into moss or substance like boils. Then came some palsied oak, a cleft in him, like a distorted mouth that splits its rim, gaping at death, and dies while it recoils. And just as far as ever from the end, not in the distance but the evening, not to point my footstep further at the thought, a great black bird, Apollyon's bosom friend, sailed past nor beat his wide winged dragon pen that brushed my cap, perchance the guide I sought. For looking up, aware I somehow grew, spite of the dusk the plain had given place, all around to mountains with such name to grace, mere ugly heights and heaps now stolen in view. How thus they had surprised me, solve it you. How to get from them was no clearer case. Yet half I seemed to recognize some trick of mischief happened to me, God knows when. In a bad dream, perhaps, here ended then. Progress this way, when in the very nick of giving up one time more came a click, as when a trap shuts, you're inside the den. Burningly it came on me all at once. This was the place, those two hills on the right, crouched like two bulls locked horn in horn in fight, while to the left a tall scalped mountain dunce doddered, a dozing at the very nonce, after a life spent training for the sight. What in the midst lay but the tower itself, the round squat turret blind as the fool's heart, built of brown stone without a counterpart, and the whole world, the tempest's mocking self, points to the shipman, thus the unseen shelf he strikes on only when the timbers start. Not see because of night, perhaps, why day came back again for that before it left, the dying sunset kindled through a cleft, the hills like giants at a hunting lay, chin upon hand to see the game at bay, now stab and end the creature to the heft. Not here, when noise was everywhere, it told, increasing like a bell, names in my ears of all the lost adventurers, my peers, how such a one was strong, and such was bold, and such was fortunate, yet each of old, lost, lost, one moment knelled the woe of years. There they stood, ranged along the hillsides, met to view the last of me, a living frame, for one more picture in a sheet of flame. I saw them, and I knew them all, and yet, dauntless the slughorn to my lips I set, and blew, Childe Roland to the dark tower came. Whew, that was a long one, but it was worth reading because it gives me goosebumps every time I do. It is such a cool poem. It is so neat to know that Robert Browning apparently wrote this. He had a dream. He dreamt of this apparently. He had a dream, as I'm given to understand it, and he woke up and just sat down and just banged out this poem. Probably not in its completed, polished form like it is now, but as I'm given to understand it, he had a dream and he woke up and he started writing this poem, or what would become this poem. And I just think that is so cool that he dreamt of this. I mean, it's basically not a dream, it's a nightmare, basically. But man, it is such a cool poem and it gives me goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps every time I read it. And I can totally understand why so many authors, Stephen King, just one among many, are drawn to this poem, and to write things inspired by it, because it is such an eerie and such a mysterious piece of writing, and it leaves so much unsaid, and there's so much implied, and it is so ambiguous and nebulous, and it's just so cool to read. Once again, if I had one poem that I could choose to have written, it would be Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came. And my second favorite poem of all time is The Conqueror Worm by Edgar Allan Poe. This is Poe's best poem. I know The Raven is Poe's most famous poem and the one that a lot of people would say that is his best poem. Those people are wrong, okay? Those people are wrong. The Raven is definitely a good poem, nothing against it, but it is nowhere nearly as good as The Conqueror Worm. Um, a neat aside, The Conqueror Worm was written independently, but Edgar Allan Poe later inserted it into his short story Ligeia, which is my personal favorite short story of Edgar Allan Poe's. Mainly because it has this poem in it, but also because it's just one of his creepiest and coolest stories. Um, but yeah, Ligeia is my favorite short story by Poe, and this poem is contained within it. But the poem exists independently as well because he wrote it. Um, he wrote it prior to writing that story. The Conqueror Worm is a nifty, very brief little narrative poem that paints a very stark and very grim picture about human life and human existence in the universe. It's important to note that Edgar Allan Poe's parents were actually theater people. I think they were both actors. And so it's really neat to see him use the motif of a theater in this, of a performance, a play, because it harkens back to his upbringing and his parents, but it also um, gives a great kind of snow globe effect view of all these angels watching the tragedy man, which I'll get to, but it's a very grim poem with a bleak outlook on life, but it is very beautiful to read, and it's just a really evocative poem. So let's get to it. Lo, 'tis a gala night within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng, bewinged, bedight in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets they who come and go at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings invisible woe. That motley drama, oh be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased for evermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth in to the self-same spot, and much of madness and more of sin and horror the soul of the plot. But see amid the mimic rout a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, the mimes become its food, and seraphs sob at vermin fangs in human gore imbued. Out, out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form, the curtain, a funeral pall, comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy man and its hero, the conqueror worm. That also gives me goosebumps to read, especially those last two lines. Um, there's a lot of philosophical depth in this poem, and I think that is a real testament to Edgar Allan Poe's skills as a poet, that he was able to write this in perfect rhyme, um, never break its pattern once, but yet he was also able to infuse so much introspection and thought into this poem because it talks about life. It talks about a crowd, a phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, because it's people chasing something that they never quite achieve, in a circle that returns always to the self same spot. Um, Everything just comes back around. Kind of history is kind of cyclical if you look at it. Um, as a lot of people view history as cyclical or cyclical, I suppose. And so it's Poe kind of reflecting on the meaning of life chasing something that you're never going to get, and then kind of just chasing humankind going around in circles continually. But then the big worm thing comes on the stage, and the curtain comes down, and the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy man, and its hero the conqueror worm. I love this image of these angels. I love the image of these angels watching human existence as a play. It's just such a great little, like I said, a snow globe type image that it is honestly kind of Lovecraftian. It's kind of a cosmic horror vibe of human existence being something so paltry and petty that it's just nothing more than a play put on to amuse a crowd of angels. But that last scene, the play is a tragedy. It's not a comedy. It's not a history or anything. It is a tragedy, and its hero is the conqueror worm, because the worm conquers all. Um, this is absolutely Edgar Allan Poe's best, and I don't know that I've read every last poem of his, but I've read a great deal. I have kind of an omnibus edition. I have a collection of a lot of his stories and a lot of his poems. Again, not everything that he wrote, but I would say probably the majority of everything that he wrote. And this poem stands head and shoulders above everything else, even the Raven. Like the to me, the fact that the Raven is his most acclaimed poem is something of a crime, because the Conqueror Worm is his best, no doubt. And my number one poem of all time is A Buffalo Skull by Ted Kooser. Okay, if you don't know who Ted Kooser is, he's an American poet. That's actually about all I know about Ted Kooser myself. My background with this poem is quite coincidental, but I would not have it any other way. I first was exposed to this poem. I want to say I was in the eighth grade. I want to say I was in the eighth grade, seventh or eighth, or maybe ninth. I think it was the eighth grade. I'm going to say it was the eighth grade in middle school. And it was at the end of the school year, and we were taking those infernal standardized tests, which are the bane of every student's existence. And on the reading and comprehension section of that particular test that year, there was this poem, A Buffalo Skull by Ted Kooser. And, I was just, kind of dead to the world. My eyes were glazed over, scratching in all these bubbles on this little Scantron sheet. And when I got to this poem, I stopped. Okay. This poem was powerful. This is one of the few times I've ever read a piece of writing or a piece of literature, and it was so powerful that I literally just had to stop. Like, I could feel something. Okay, like, I know that's going to sound strange or outlandish, but I could literally feel something like move within me when I read this poem. Have no idea why. It's not even really that great of a poem, but it struck a chord with me so powerfully that literally after reading this poem, I was just kind of sitting there. Like, I almost didn't even complete that section of the test, because I was just sitting there in kind of stunned silence, staring into space after reading this poem. And I was like, that was amazing. Because, like, I can't even really describe what's so great about this poem, because it's tiny. It is so small, but the starkness of its imagery and the power with which it evokes its imagery and kind of the implications behind its imagery just really struck a chord with me. And this has been my number one poem of all time ever since, and I doubt that will ever change, because this was one of the most gripping and moving experiences with a piece of literature that I've ever had. So, without without further ado, A Buffalo Skull by Ted Kooser. No fine white bone sheen now. 100 hard years have worn it away. This stump washed up on a bar in the river, its horns like broken roots, its muzzle filled with sand, and the thin gray breath of spider webs. Once they covered the grasslands like the shadows of clouds, and now the river gives up just one skull, a hive of bone like a fallen wasp's nest, heavy, empty, and full of the whine of the wind and old thunder. That still moves me. That still gives me goosebumps and moves me just as much as it did all those years ago when I read this just by happenstance on a test at the end of the school year. Um, if nothing else, I am thankful to, public education for giving me this poem because I've treasured it ever since I read it all those many years ago, and it has stuck with me ever since. This is, I mean, yeah, this is it. This is number one. This is my favorite poem of all time. I can't even really tell you why, other than that it just kind of moves me, and it is very melancholic in its the implications that the connotations that it carries with it of the extinction of the buffalo and the hunting to extinction that Americans did to the buffalo, and the kind of the death of that era, the death of the old west, um, where now all that is left is one single buffalo skull washed up in a river. Um, and it is that last line is just gets me. Old thunder, heavy, empty, and full of the whine of the wind and old thunder. Gosh, that just moves me every time I read it. Gosh, I love that poem. But yeah, A Buffalo Skull by Ted Kooser. I've never read any other poem by Ted Kooser. I have never read any other poem by Ted Kooser other than this, and yet this is, I think, the best poem that I've ever read. Coincidental happens. I just read it by happenstance when I was a kid, but I'm so glad I did because it is such a great poem, I think. So yeah, that was my top five favorite poems of all time. I hope you have enjoyed. I hope you've stuck around and listened this long. I hope you've enjoyed my poems, and let me know down in the comments what your favorite poems are because I would love to read more poetry. I would love to expose myself a little bit more to the medium, to the form, and yeah, I'd like to just kind of get exposed to a little bit more of it because again, I don't read that much of it. But I would like to remedy that too. So if you have any suggestions for great poems that I should check out, just let me know down in the comments and I will do so. Um, and have you read any or all of the poems which I have listed here as my favorite? I'm willing to bet that pretty much everybody has number five at least. But if you have not read any of these poems, well, I just read them to you, so you don't even have to go hunt for them to get the experience because I gave it to you. Um, Good-hearted, generous soul that I am. So yeah, let me know down in the comments what you thought. If you've read any or all of these poems previously, and as always, remember to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.